Listen, what can I say? It is the best time of the week because we get to dive into the biggest pop culture stories. There's this Shein influencer trip that's causing a lot of controversy. An iconic Beyonce song turns 20, but really it's timeless. You know this. Today on the show, it's our end of the week group chat. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Listen, there's a bunch of people in this Zoom room with me who are vibing to our theme song. We're going to get to them in just a moment. But first, I got to tell you that we got to talk about the year 2003, which was a big year for me personally. Not just because I turned 15 and all the things that happen in pop culture when you turn 15 are imprinted upon you for the rest of time, but also because, first of all, iTunes opened its online music doors for the very first time. Avril Lavigne, who's incidentally from Napanee, Ontario, which is incidentally right outside of my hometown of Kingston, Ontario, Avril launched her very first headlining tour. Ruben Studdard beat out Clay Aiken to win American Idol. Everybody was really excited about 2003. And then a really big thing happened, which is that Beyonce came out and just owned the summer thanks to this little number.
Yes. So crazy right now. History in the making. Part 2. So crazy right now.
I look to stare so deep in your eyes.
Do you guys think when Jay-Z said history in the making, he knew that he was making history then? I don't know. But that is, of course, Crazy in Love by Beyonce, the debut solo single off the debut solo album, Dangerously in Love. I think it's kind of easy to take for granted because we live in the age of Beyonce, but like, that's when it started, and that's what we're going to talk about today. That and lots of other topics. Kathleen, Rad, Sarah-Tai are here. They were all doing the Beyonce dance from the Crazy in Love video as that song was playing. What's good, everybody? Welcome to the show.
Hi,
Elamin.
What I like is that we all did the same motion at the same time because it's the one that's tattooed upon our culture memories.
It's what you do.
It's what you do. When this song comes on, you're like, I actually, like, when we were talking about doing this conversation for the show, I kept on doing that dance move to our producer Ty, and he was like, I wish you would stop. And I said, not a chance, Ty. This is just kind of your life for this week. Exactly right. Rad, can you just root us in the moment a little bit and remind us what was exactly the stakes for Beyonce, just like career-wise, in 2003 when she dropped Crazy in Love?
Oh my gosh, the stakes were huge because this was, of course, the lead single for her debut album, Dangerously in Love. And, you know, it's not an easy thing to break off from a super successful group, a group that had hits like Say My Name. Like that's it's not easy to escape from that shadow. And of course, when you're breaking off on your own, you're going to have your doubters. I was a Beyonce doubter. I'm not proud of it. Okay.
Wow.
But
brave
you know, like,
to admit it.
I mean, listen, like I was there like, you know what? I think Kelly's actually the singing talent at the time. Remember, at the time, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And I was thinking at the time that I wonder if Beyonce's, you know, like she's the one that's more successful because of the colorism of the industry and all that stuff. You had all those doubts. Then you question kind of this moment where there's these rumored relationships with Jay-Z, like, oh my God, all of a sudden Miss Bugaboo's hooking up with Mr. Big Pimpin'. Like, what's going on? So these are all the things we are thinking about when she drops this album, this song, this track. And she's literally feeding the rumor mill with a duet with Jay-Z. But then you listen to those lyrics, it's like, you know, your love got me looking real crazy right now. Like, that's like she's talking to the people. She knows what people are thinking about her, and she's talking directly to them. So big swing.
What I love about this is that you just bravely said, I thought that Kelly Rowland was the talent of the group. I'll tell you what, you were a little bit justified in thinking that then, just in the sense of, at that point, Kelly Rowland had come out with Dilemma, which is like a song that she did with Nelly. That song had gone #1 and nothing. There's been no Michelle. There's been no Beyonce in the culture. So we're like, is Kelly going to be the one to escape the Destiny's Child vortex? As it turns out, Sarah-Tai, that is like not at all the case. The song drops. The music video drops. What do you love about it?
Well, I don't want to hate on Cal. I mean, she had Dilemma. The whole Dangerously in Love album was like delayed to make room for Dilemma,
That's
which
right.
is like, you know, an iconic use of Excel in pop culture. But as for the video, like it really was, she came out of the gates at a sprint and at this level of like performing that we come to know her for, but just like doing the thing in like a white tee and jorts, you know, like that Versace dress, which on its own isn't that great, but she made it so iconic. And all of the choreography. It was also the beginning of this moment, like while we're doing the intro, we're doing like the like hit it. We all know the moves. It's like the beginning of that era for Beyonce, where her as a performer becomes like part of the iconography. It was feeding into this like Jay-Z Beyonce lore before we kind of figured out that was maybe problematic. And a lot of us were like of the age where we kind of like weren't cognizant of those kind of implications.
Sure.
But huge time. Huge.
What I love about this is Sarah-Tai, again, just doing the choreo, punctuating every sentence as you sort of explain the significance of the song. Kathleen, what about you? What about how did this song resonate with you?
I mean, I think it's all really been said, but it was one of those, as Sarah-Tai mentioned, one of those like you had to be there moments because music videos do not hit in the same way anymore. You know, for me, I was watching Much Music and BT, but I was watching Much Music, like waiting for Crazy in Love to come on the countdown. And I think, you know, when we're talking about the dance move, we're talking about the like as calculated and brilliant. Yeah,
we
like
can't
that.
stop. We can't stop.
Yeah, this is a tough panel to do on the radio because like the whole visuals of this is everybody doing the dance moves. But go off.
Well, I just think as calculated as Beyonce is now, and like there's brilliance in that calculation, I don't think that Crazy in Love shimmy shake dance was as orchestrated or meant to go viral as we see, you know, with TikTok dances now. The video is actually really simple and it just relies on that sheer charisma and power of Beyonce, Giselle, Knowles Carter. And I think that, you know, the gossip that we've all talked about, that we've alluded to about B and Jay's relationship, it added to the lore of this video for sure and set the blueprint for other celebrity couples to come. But, you know, ultimately, I think it's just like, this is a banger of a song. The iconic visuals match that. And my favorite moments are just when B it's just her and the camera, and she's just proving herself as the solo star that you cannot look away from. Again, no disrespect to Kelly, but this is a moment where you're like, oh, it's been Beyonce and it will always Beyonce.
I desperately wish that this panel specifically had a TV show because the visuals that you guys are giving me are iconic in their own particular way. Rad, we gotta say, you know, like, yes, Crazy in Love was a massive hit, but it's not the only hit off that debut album. They pair her with Sean Paul for Baby Boy. I think it's like, in retrospect, you can read that as like, oh, the label's not sure how this is going to go. Maybe we should get like somebody who's kind of established, so they turn to Sean Paul to sort of be paired off on the song on Baby Boy. You also have Naughty Girl, Me, Myself, and I. Do you feel like Dangerously in Love did what Beyonce needed it to do?
Well, I'm going to counter the narrative about Sean Paul, you know, being the one that lifts up Beyonce being the more established.
Give me the light, man. Let's go.
I think Beyonce put Sean Paul on for American audiences with that song, right? Because on Sean Paul, I think, like, you know, he had the Toronto slingshot working with, like, you know, Director X and stuff. But when Beyonce and Sean Paul get together on Baby Boy, then it's like a whole new world opened up for him, I think.
Wow.
Right? But that's my
giving
feeling
Beyonce credit for Sean Paul's career. Now that's revisionist history.
To that market, Toronto knew. Toronto was all about Sean Paul.
That's a wackadoodle opinion, and you know it.
I know.
Justy Rock came out in 2002. Get busy. You're not fooling anybody.
But when
with
did the
this.
American audience pick up on that?
Oh
Toronto knew.
Lord.
Jamaica knew. The
Come on.
Americans needed, like, I think Sean Paul, like, I think Beyonce broke open Sean Paul to all the other people. But that's my thought. But to your point, though, and bear in mind, I am also, of course, like, kind of like the one that wasn't initially blown away by Crazy in Love. I was the doubter at the time. But I think looking back at it in retrospect, you look at that album, you look at like kind of the classic R&B song cries of Me, Myself, and I and Dangerously in Love, which was, of course, that was a repeat from the previous Destiny's Child album. But you look at like the diversity of that album, working with Sean Paul, you see the ingredients of what Beyonce will become 10 years down the road with the self-titled album. You see, like, if for me, like, obviously Beyonce blew up, like that's when I really paid attention, right? In 2013, 10 years later, when the self-titled album comes up, then Lemonade and stuff. And that's when I look back at that album, at Crazy in Love, in retrospect, I'm like, oh my God, it's all there.
It's all been there since the start,
it's all
right?
been there. Like her willingness to be vulnerable, her willingness to speak to what's going on and speak to her audience. And also just this eclectic mix of styles. That was all like, so that's, I'm a late born like a born again Beyonce fan.
There's always
you guys.
always room, man. We don't fault you for that. Kathleen, last question for you on this: where does "Crazy in Love" land on your list of all time Beyonce songs?
This is the hardest choice ever. I don't know why you're doing this to me, but I think Formation, the lead single off of Lemonade, I think that is Beyonce's best single. And I think as far as cultural relevance, popularity, I think it wins.
Yeah.
And the video was its own cultural phenomenon as well. But I think Crazy in Love is a close second to that. I'm going to put it at number 2. And that's saying a lot. I don't think we would be talking about it 20 years later if it wasn't that timeless classic. But I'm just going to say for the record that my personal favorite Beyonce single is Love on Top.
That's the correct choice because the correct Beyonce album is, in fact, 4. I will not be taking any further questions. Okay.
I mean, we agree on something.
We agree on something.
Wow.
We found the thing. Absolutely incredible. I was like, just going to move this discussion along so no one disagrees with me. And just so I don't get hit with the Sarah-Tai wackadoodle opinion. Woof!
I will take Sarah-Tai's wackadoodle opinion on the regular.
Oh my
okay?
gosh. The
hurt.
things I've heard in this conversation today.
Okay. Let's switch gears. Let's go to this.
China trip has been one of the most life-changing trips in my life. Getting to see the whole process of Shein clothing from beginning to end with my own 2 eyes was so important for me. Kicking off the trip by heading to the factory of the leading manufacturer for Shein was the perfect way to start. I was really excited and impressed to see the working conditions. I think my biggest takeaway from this trip is to be an independent thinker, get the facts, and see it with your own 2 eyes. There's a narrative fed to us in the U.S., and I'm one that always likes to be open-minded and seek the truth, so I'm grateful for that about myself, and I hope the same for you guys.
It's amazing that we couldn't get through that clip without everyone on the panel just kind of giggling to themselves a little bit. Listen, that is a clip of an influencer who goes by the name Danny DMC. In that clip, you hear Danny reflecting on the sponsored trip that they made to China to tour the facilities of the online clothing retailer Shein. Shein is probably the biggest fashion company in the world right now. And in that clip, Danny's basically saying, you know what? I'm going to sing some praises of Shein, even though they've drawn a lot of criticism. Kathleen, why has this story been the thing that's raising so many eyebrows?
I mean, those clips are so egregious, but they're also funny. And I think anytime Twitter can rally behind a cause, but also get some jokes off, it's going to go in. But I think, the issue at the center of this story is not new. I think we all know that fast fashion is bad. We've heard of the alleged labor abuse that Shein has been accused of, the vast environmental impact of their company. There were rumors that workers were stitching "help me" into the tags of garments. We've all heard that. Yeah. And we've seen influencers on brand trips and maybe, rolled our eyes at them knowing that it's just sponsored content, SponCon. But I think the blatant nature of seeing these influencers walking around this shiny factory, spewing propaganda, knowing that these are not the conditions of all Shein factories and that they just picked these specific influencers like Danny DMC specifically so that they could take the brunt of it. I think, she said this was her first brand trip. So they gave an opportunity to a lot of these maybe smaller influencers who haven't gotten the attention that they had in the past or that other influencers had, so they could take the brunt of it. And I think that, that is why we all kind of jumped on this, because they were just so gullible. Yeah. And I think ultimately that influencer, Instagram, fast fashion convergence has been blowing up over the years, and it was bound to come to a head like this.
Well, I think it's worth mentioning, Danny DMC, this is the main influencer being dragged for this story, I should say, and for their support of Shein. They've apologized, have admitted that they should have done more research. I think this story seems to intersect with certain topics that we talk about all the time, about how this idea of how should influencers be doing journalism? Should they be doing journalism whatsoever? What's their relationship to the practice of doing journalism? Sarah-Tai, do you think something needs to be done to better prepare influencers for the ethical implications of their power?
I think industry-wise, if influencers become more prepared in that way, it will blur the lines between influencers and journalism. Yeah. And that's something that I definitely don't want to see. As far as being prepared for this scenario, it's I don't know what to tell you. There's been so much in-depth investigative journalism on Shein. At this point, it's you either know and you don't care, or you don't care enough to know. You know what I mean? And I think It's less about influencers needing to be prepared and more about us as media consumers being able to parse critically all media, including influencers. Like, I would never turn to an influencer as like a news source. Their job is literally to influence, not to inform with depth or any kind of like ethical care. They're sponsored. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Are we still talking about the Tarte trip? Like, I know I'm deeply in like beauty influencer drama.
Yeah.
I love it. So it's like, I would never be able to take anything seriously, like on an influencer speaking on like human rights issues or like labor violations.
Rad, what's your read on this?
Well, look, I mean, like, I think when Sarah-Tai says, like, she doesn't want to blur the lines, my worry is that the lines are already been blurred, and they're blurring it in so many different ways. I mean, ultimately, we're looking at, like, some PR company controlling narratives through influencers. And, you know, while we have newsrooms being cut back, we are seeing even in newsrooms how understaffed newsrooms are just, you know, they're regurgitating lines from PR departments. We're regurgitating police PR departments, real estate lobby PR departments, just putting those things unchecked, right? So now it's like, you know, like even in the work that me and Kathleen do, we work in entertainment reporting and stuff like that, right? I once had a publicist tell me that I have to choose between being an entertainment reporter and a journalist. Wow. And I was like, there's a distinction there. And the distinction is, if I want to have access, if I want to go to parties, if I want to have interviews with the stars and stuff, I better not ask questions, was the line. And that person has never invited me to a thing since. But that's the game. Like, what's going on with influencers and the way they, you know, the people who will take that content and feed it to the Toronto Star or whatever, like, they have to play this game. And that's like, how is what's happening with Shein any different than what's happening in entertainment journalism and a lot of our news media?
So I just want to, that's exactly right. And I want to just sort of maybe close on this note in terms of this particular topic and just say, one of our producers has kind of mentioned that one of her kids said, you know what, I saw on the news that Shein is fine as a company because one of the people reporting on it said this company is not doing anything that is wrong. And they in fact were just seeing some of these stories. Like, younger people are really deeply influenced by influencers and they end up conflating them with what the news is. So I would just say, talk to the young people in your life, man, because it really, really matters that they understand and have the media literacy to sort of analyze what they're seeing. I do want to close today's panel, though, by talking about a new list that CBCR has just released. It is called The 50 Greatest Films Directed by Canadians, which makes for a pretty fun, cool Canada read. I think you should spend some time on it. Rad, you were a huge part of compiling this list and wrote entries 11 to 50. How did the CBC go about putting this thing together?
Yeah, I mean, so basically the editors at CBC Arts, they reached out to every film critic, every film writer, every film programmer they could get out to, and polled them on what's your top 10 films directed by Canadians. So key distinction is this is not the best Canadian films. This is the best films directed by Canadians. So that opens your door to, you know, you get Titanic and In the Heat of the Night on the top 10, because these, you know, sometimes our Canadian, our best talents do their best work when they're, you know, not handcuffed by our budget constraints and they're making movies in Hollywood and whatnot, right? So as the subhead goes, near and far, wherever they are, this is the best that they made. So a little witty. And
good subhead.
I think you got a very diverse look at the history of Canadian film in there. Well, diverse with limitations, I would say.
Sarah-Tai, you're a film critic first and foremost. Is your reaction to this list that Terminator 2 was too low?
I gotta tell you, I'm in the conversation. I'm loving it, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, got me looking. I'm still back there. I mean, Terminator 2, the inclusion of these like Canadian directors rather than Canadian filmmakers, no comment. I think in general, the recent films, like in the past 10 or so years that are included, skew very white, although I'm super happy to see like a lot of like contemporary Indigenous filmmakers, because I think when we make these kind of canonical lists, we tend to like, and by we, I don't mean me, I mean whiteness, tends to like isolate indigeneity as in the past and history and this kind of positioning of past achievements, which is obviously really violent and refuses acknowledging present day work. I'm wondering, just based on the films, the quality of the films we see on this list, I'm wondering, like, why could we not put Kelly Five Marshall's When Morning Comes? Like, that's definitely on par with some of the films that are on here. I don't really understand why Stories We Tell is at number 2, although I completely understand. Mostly, I think my disappointment with this list comes alongside disappointment with the industry at large. But I also would have loved to see, like, more inclusion of experimental filmmakers. You know, it's like, why isn't Joyce Wieland on this list? It's just strange, you know, to only see like even just one Michael Snow film on this list. I think that outside of like obvious directors like Cronenberg, this is very much like a conventional narrative filmmaking list, which is not necessarily the story of filmmaking in Canada.
Kathleen, what about you? Any films that stood out for you?
Yeah, I was excited to see Clement Virgo on that list. But what stood out to me was that there are no Black women directors represented on this list. Kelly Fife Marshall's When Morning Comes was an option that I thought definitely could have been on that list. Christine Brown's Another Planet, Frances Ann Solomon's A Winter Tale. I just watched Black Mother, Black Daughter at a TIFF screening hosted by Sarah-Tai a couple weeks ago.
Nice.
That's a film by Claire Prieto and Sylvia Hamilton. So the talent is there, and it was disappointing for me to not see that reflected. But I think it is also not surprising because the Canadian film industry, like Hollywood, consistently ignores the contributions of Black women, especially Black women directors.
Rad, when you look at all these 50 films, what do you think it says about Canada's legacy of filmmaking?
I mean, I think both Sarah and Kathleen hinted at something. Like, this is a list basically of the usual suspects. This is a list of like we know a lot of these greats because the establishment, which is diversifying but still overwhelmingly white, has long celebrated these films. And when they're especially talking about, like maybe my frustrations with this list would be my frustrations with this industry. Like, for the last year, I've been trying to get people to pay attention to, say, Myriam Charles's Cette Maison, which for me was the best Canadian film of the last year. It's a Haitian Canadian filmmaker who really tells us really amazing, dramatic, documentary story. And, but Canada was not paying attention. The Toronto Film Critics Association, the Canadian Academy, no one celebrated this film. The New Yorker and New York Times, however, are trumpeting it. So in my mind, I'm like, who are the Myriam Charles of the last 50 years? I know all of these films and I know they're great, but I don't know those films that were ignored the way a Myriam Charles was ignored today. I don't know who was ignored in the 70s in that same way because no one's showing me those films. And I think this list will be reflective of that inherently.
Listen, before we go, we got to say that Canada lost a legend this week. When it came to sex education on Canadian television, Sue Johanson was the undisputed greatest of all time. She died this week. She was 93. And while her shows Sunday Night Sex Show and the spinoff Talk Sex with Sue Johanson taught so many Canadians everything about sex, Sue's influence transcended this country. Here she is on Late Night with Conan O'Brien back in 2006.
Nice to have you here.
Brought the hot stuff bag.
Oh, okay. Let's ramp up to that gradually, all right?
We'll do it gently, Bentley.
Okay. We're off and running already.
I would like to know what's in the hot stuff bag, very desperately, actually. Sarah-Tai, I just got to ask you before we go, what was your relationship to Sue?
Oh my gosh. Sue was like my second white mom, possibly like my third white aunt. I really relished the secretive time I spent watching the Sunday Night Sex Show. It actually taught me a lot. It filled a void of sexual education that was not happening, but it also felt a bit devious because it was not just education. It was pro-sex, pro-kink, pro-queer, from what I remember. But, it's just such a formative moment of my own queerness and transness and sexuality that I'm just so sad she's gone, and I just love a body lady.
Body BAWDY.
Yes.
That's delightful. Thank you so much for that lovely little reflection. I think so many people just remember Sue for letting them learn something that nobody else was willing to talk to them about.
Exactly.
Right? And just kind of doing it in such a direct way. Sue Johanson, the Canadian goat of sex TV, she died this week at 93. And thank you, Rad, Kathleen, Sarah-Tai, for this wonderful time that we spent together. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. Anytime that you want to talk about Beyonce or do the Beyonce moves, you're welcome back on the show because it was a delight to watch all of you just do the exact same move at the exact same time. It made my life so much better. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Sarah-Tai Black is a freelance film critic. You can read their work on CBC Arts and the Globe and Mail. Rad Simonpillai is a film critic with CBC and CTV. And Kathleen Newman-Bremang is editorial director at Refinery 29 Unbothered. And of course, you should spend some time with the CBC's 50 Greatest Films Directed by Canadians. Head over to CBC Arts. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and that is our show for today. Listen, I'm going to be here next week. If you'll be here next week too, I'd love to see you then.